Understanding and Protecting Native Biodiversity, which is organised by the EXPBIO-Project. My name is Helen Ekvall. I work at Gothenburg Botanical Garden in Sweden, and I'm a PhD student at the University of Gothenburg. Also with me today is Gunilla, who is the project leader for EXPBIO. The EXPBIO project is funded by the EU Interreg North Sea programme. We are 8 partners from Sweden, Denmark, Germany, the Netherlands and Belgium. We are municipalities, universities, botanical gardens, public research institutes and governmental agencies. Our aim is to increase plant biodiversity in the North Sea region and raise awareness of its importance. Concerned about the decline in flower and insect diversity, we are working to identify effective ways to support and restore it. I'm delighted to see so many of you here today who are interested in exploring practical and scientific approaches to raise plant awareness and increase engagement in the natural world. When we don't understand ecosystems and the roles that plants play in them, we may overlook the life forms we depend on. We cannot protect what we don't know, recognize, or value. Last spring, we held a series of webinars on seed mixtures and seed cultivation, followed by a second webinar series last autumn focusing on grassland restoration. This third and last series will focus on 5 speakers who share their latest insights on how we can engage people in plant diversity, increase plant awareness, and also show how plants and wildlife can relieve stress. I'm very grateful that Peter Pany is here today to start the webinar series and to talk about how the scientific understanding of human-plant relationships has evolved, and I'm sure we will learn a lot from his experience. Peter Pany is a researcher at the University of Vienna. His projects focus on developing educational settings to foster plant awareness. He has co-developed the Plant Awareness Inventory and contributed to studies on students' conceptions of plants and educational strategies to enhance plant awareness. The webinar will last about 1 hour, 30 to 40 minutes for the presentation, and the rest of the time for discussions. Some technical issues. We ask you to mute your microphone. We suggest using the chat for communication and the discussion after the talk. As you already know, this webinar will be, or you probably already know, this webinar will be recorded. With that, I hand over to you, Peter.
Yeah, thank you, Helen. Let me thank you once again to give me the opportunity to present some of my work we did here at the University of Vienna during the last years. When I started my studies around plants in the Vienna Botanical Garden in 2005 or 6, I didn't really think about getting into a really serious development of scientific research, and so I'm happy to have the opportunity today to present you kind of overview of our work that we did during the last years. As you all know, at the moment, we're also working on and helping biodiversity to develop and protect biodiversity. And you may know this cartoon, which should initially depict that behind the crisis of COVID-19 pandemic, there will follow a crisis of economic recession. And then the artist was thinking about, okay, maybe there was something even larger than the economic recession, and he reworked his cartoon and added an even bigger wave of climate change. And then there was the year, okay, maybe after climate change, there could be an even bigger problem with biodiversity collapsing. And we don't know what comes behind biodiversity collapse at the moment. Maybe it's in a way doesn't work as it should. Even bigger waves behind, but we may focus today on the biodiversity collapse. So we are at the moment, like the United Nations program says, we are in a triple planetary crisis about pollution, biodiversity collapse, and climate change. And I think in all of these crises, but especially in the climate change and biodiversity collapse, plants are at the very heart of the solution for these crises. So we think that knowledge about plants is clue to help us overcome this crisis, or to even maybe at least mitigate the impact of the crisis. We should know classically about plant anatomy and morphology, about photosynthesis, about plants as producers in ecosystems, about plant reproduction, about flower ecology. That's what we also teach in school or at university level. And sometimes that's a bit isolated from what we could, from the importance of this knowledge, because if you connect it to the current global issues like food production or the carbon cycle and global warming and the climate change crisis, which could be even influenced by using or enhancing the biofuels or GMOs in agriculture, or also the biodiversity crisis. To address all these problems, we will need knowledge about plants. And when we look at the Sustainable Development Goals, there are scholars that say to reach the Sustainable Development Goals, for all of the 17 goals, we will need plants. And I'm sure that's true, but I think there are some goals where it is easier to see or to understand why. And so at least at more than the half of them are quite closely related to plants, and the others are also connected to plants. So even for reaching the SDGs, we will be dependent on plants. And unfortunately, around 2001, maybe at the end of the last century, there was a phenomenon described under the term plant blindness. But even before this term was coined, there were also people working about plants in education. And there were also results from science saying we are all more interested in animals than in plants, which stands from 1991. And the earliest quote I've found about from botanists moaning about students don't being interested in botany, I think it's from 1919. So I think it's an issue that accompanies us in botany quite for a long time. And Wandersee and Schussler were the scholars who coined the term plant blindness, and they said, okay, plants are often completely overlooked in everyday life, and we don't have an idea of the role of plants for biological systems and for environment. Plants are in a way seen as lower organisms than animals, and the perception of plants is quite bad, let's say. There were some symptoms described in the literature. So many people don't have personal contact with plants or with plant growth. Students are not able to apply biological concepts to plants they learn. Pupils don't know the needs of plants. What do they need to grow? What do they need to live? And the role of plants in ecosystems is not acknowledged or not recognized. Even common plants cannot be named by students. Pupils only notice very colorful or well or flowers with a smell, and they don't recognize the diversity in the plant kingdom because they just see them as a plant or even as a tree. Plants are considered in a way as lower organisms than animals. And plants are often seen only as a background scenery for animal life. So what we can conclude from all these problems, students may develop or certainly have a limited view on nature. And then there were followed around 10 to 15 years describing the problem and exploring what students are not able to do or where plants are underrepresented and so on. And after 20 years, there were the first voices in the community calling for maybe a new terminology because of considerations of ableism, since blindness may be a bad term for just to express that plants are in a kind underrepresented, or people are not so much aware of plants because, and that was the beginning of the rethinking of this plant blindness terminology that was quite common for about 20 years. And then we were thinking, and Kate Parsley from the United States proposed to call it plant awareness disparity with these key concepts she presented here, that plants are not that interesting as animals. People don't like plants. There is no attention towards plants, and people don't have much knowledge about plants. And then we were thinking about, okay, maybe it would make sense, also from an educational point of view, not to always focus on the deficits, but to try to give the whole issue a positive connotation and a positive framing. And in 2022, we suggested to describe or to call the phenomenon plant awareness, to give students a goal that we want to reach, and that we want our students to become plant aware, rather than always working against plant blindness and trying to avoid something, and always trying to teach our students to mitigate some bad, maybe inherent problems they bring with them when they come to our lessons, maybe. And recently there was published a paper from a colleague in Brazil where they concluded there is no such thing as plant blindness or plant awareness disparity in a way that it's a pathological entity. There is only differential attention to different groups of organisms, and they are also calling for not pathologizing some issues we bring maybe from our evolution, that maybe animals are even more prominent in our perception because they can look at us. They could also be dangerous for us. They could also be maybe some food for us, provide food for us. And so there are some reasons, and maybe some good reasons, that we may spend more attention to animals than to plants. But it's not something that's pathological, and it's not nothing that is inherited and nothing that can't be changed. And so we were thinking about, well, for describing what does it mean to be plant aware, or what do we mean when we talk about plant awareness, we have to develop a construct. And a construct is a term that describes and specifies the unique attributes of a phenomenon. So something you can't measure directly, or you can't assess directly. And so plant awareness was our idea of what we think we can work about, and we can our aim to reach with our students. And now we were developing the construct to describe what does it mean to be plant aware, and how can we assess how plant aware a person is. So what were our research objectives? One of our questions was, how can we assess a person's plant awareness? And the other point was, what do people think of plants in a way that we wanted to explore when we talk about plants? What pictures do people have in mind? And this question led to our work regarding construct development and validation, which I will present to you. And the other one leads to our studies about mental models of plants, which I also will try to give you a short overview. So if you're developing a construct, you have to, of course, you don't just write down what you think, what plant awareness is, but you have to also make sure and compare with others what they think that plant awareness is. And there is one methodology which is called a Delphi approach, or a Delphi study, which does not mean like in ancient Greece that we ask the oracle what's plant awareness, but our oracle was not the Pythia here, but our oracle was a group of different scientists and educators. We worked with a mixed method approach. Delphi studies are often applied when there is a new field of science developing, and when it's about, in a first step, defining what's the field and what are we talking about. And we worked with a set of experts. We had, in the first round, we had 2 psychologists, 4 botany educators, and 7 researchers already working in the field of plant blindness, plant awareness. And after each round of the Delphi study, we were exchanging the answers in an anonymous way. We were together reflecting about the parts of the construct where consensus has been reached. And the next round was only about those parts of the construct where there has not been consensus in the first 2 rounds. The participants were anonymous, and we were testing our suggestions for the construct of what we think how plant awareness is structured, and also the tool of how we think we can operationalize the plant awareness construct into a questionnaire tool. And we have 3 rounds with 13, 20, and 15 scientists. And after 3 rounds, we reached consensus about all of the parts of the construct and also on the tool. So one result of this Delphi approach was a definition of what we think plant awareness is. Plant awareness is defined as a multidimensional construct that reflects the level of someone's perception, understanding, and valuation of plants. And as you see, the perception is related to attention towards plants. Our understanding of plants is related to what we know about plants, where we made a differentiation between local and global knowledge. And our valuation is related to our attitudes towards plants. And then there are some factors influencing plant awareness, like interest in plants, learning motivation about plants, emotions, plant mentors, people who talk to us or teach us about plants, and also personal experiences we have in our development. So the next step was to test the construct in a statistical way, and so we used 3 different samples where we were thinking that they should differ in their plant awareness. That's called known groups validity. So if our tool assesses plant awareness in the proper way, it should give some differences between groups where we know that they should differ in regarding plant awareness. And we chose pupils from middle schools in Vienna, in an urban area. And the results I will show you will always be represented by these sky scratches here, these urban middle school students. Then we had a subsample of nature park schools, which is a type of schools in Austria that are related to protected areas called nature parks. And they also include the nature park that is normally close to the school, or the school is close to the nature park for planning their lessons. So they should be more connected to nature and thereby also to plants. And then we had one group of experts from the Austrian Flora Research Association, which and all of the students and all of the experts participated voluntarily in our studies. So if you see these 3 symbols, the houses, the tree, and the expert, they will also always mark the results for the 3 different groups in the next slides. First, we tested attention. And when we talk about attention, we have to define what we are talking about. Attention is as we use it, is a selective cognitive process that helps our brain processing all of the information that comes through the sensory system. And since our brain can't process all of the information that comes through the sensory system, around 20 to 50 items per second can be processed. There is an urgent need for some selective processes, and these selective processes are influenced by our experiences. So we know that pre-existing knowledge can influence our attention when we look at a picture or at a scenery or whatever. Our emotions can also influence our attention, and also our attitudes influence our attention. So people or things we consider important, we are more attentive to than things we think are not important. And what we did is we developed a hidden object picture that is already shown here in the slide. I don't have the time to explain in detail how we structured the picture, but it was a long process of design-based research where we had some and another round of feedback with experts and with botanists and with students. And it reflects more or less a kind of average landscape in many parts of Austria. And I think it could also work for, let's say, Central Europe. And we showed this picture to our participants. They had 30 to 16 seconds time to look at the picture. And then we took the picture away and asked them to write a list of all things they can remember, what they saw in the picture, with a maximum of 25 things they could write down. And in the first step, we also did an eye tracking study. And I will present you now some of the results from this eye tracking studies. So we had the possibility to see where people look in the picture, because we wanted to know whether the attention in a way can be primed by giving the people or the students a task, so that whether we wanted to know whether we can influence by a task what they are looking at the picture. And without priming, you see here the dark parts of the picture are parts where people didn't look that long or that often, and the lighter parts are those areas of the picture where people focused on. And so you can see, I will not change to the laser pointer here. You can see here the football, you can see the squirrel, you can see the man-made objects, the houses, the car, back here the village, the church, also the harvesting machine here, and the butterfly here in the center, but rather not too many plants. And then we gave them the task to look for the useful plants in the picture. And you can see there are some areas that are quite similar, where you see they are still looking at the squirrel, even at the steer here in the back of the picture, which can be better seen here maybe. But what we see is, especially in this area, there has been a change. So people look at the vegetable plot, at the fruit trees, at the strawberries here in the front of the picture, and even on the fungi. So they are scanning the picture in a different way. When they look for useful plants, they are looking for, our hypothesis is they are looking for colorful structures, because they are looking for fruit maybe. And so what we see is that attention, in a way of how we look at the picture or where we look at the picture, is something we can influence. So it's nothing that is kind of hardwired in our brain and we can't influence, and it's inherited and or maybe evolutionary heritage, and we can't influence how we look at a picture for plants or even animals. When we compare the results of the lists the people wrote after looking at the picture, I won't go into detail, but what we calculated is called salience counts. So the higher the salience value is, the more often a term has been listed, and it's rather on the upper ranks. So when if a term is listed in every list of the sample and always on rank number 1, it has salience 1. And if it's never listed and it's 0, and a little above 0 is maybe are terms that are very seldom mentioned in the lists and only on the last ranks maybe in the list. And what you see is that we calculated a mean for all plants in the picture, and we have also here the urban middle school students, the nature park students, and our expert group. We see that experts have higher salience counts for plants than the nature park students, and the nature park students have higher salience counts than the urban middle school students. If we do the same for animals, we see there is not such a big difference between the nature park students and the experts. By the experts are botanists. But there is a difference between the middle school, the urban middle school students, and the nature park students. And what's the most important thing is for anthropogenic objects in the picture, you see that the experts have quite lower values than the students. And we can see also that the anthropogenic objects for experts are even lower than the plants. So for our botanists, the plants are the most salient objects. For the two groups of students, the anthropogenic objects are the most salient objects. What we also see is that we find quite general terms for plants in our list. and quite specific for animals. So we have field, tree, forest, flower, butterfly, beetle, squirrel, and so on. And also for the anthropogenic objects, human, house, football, hospital, child, beekeeper, and so on. So I think, or we think that what's really the difference between our experts and people we think they are plant aware, and the students are not so much how they list plants and versus animals, but the big difference is how they see the natural objects in comparison to the anthropogenic objects, so the inanimate objects. And what we also see is here, students use quite more general terms like forest or field or tree that experts use quite seldom. And experts use much more specific terms. So they have, of course, maybe a more detailed or a better vocabulary to describe what they were talking about. But we see that students quite seldom use that's only the plants, use specific names or the name of a species in comparison to the experts. What we also found out that if we had a subsample of students, we asked them to identify some plants depicted, the 10 most frequent plants in the picture. So we asked them, write the plant's name in the field. And we didn't find a correlation between the identification and the salience. So that even if they know the plant, and if there are the most prominent example were the dandelion, I think 88% of the students were able to identify the dandelion on species level, but it was in 0% of the lists. So nobody wrote the dandelion into the list, even if everybody was able to identify it. So if we compare just the percentage of the coverage, we see 71% of the picture is covered by plants, 1% by animals, 27% by anthropogenic objects. And those are the percentages from the listings. So we see plants are clearly underrepresented in the listings with regard to the area they cover in the picture. The strongest effect or the strongest difference is here for animals, where you see almost a third of the terms listed by 1% coverage in the area of the picture, and also inanimate anthropogenic objects are represented in the lists higher or more often than with regard to the coverage of the area in the picture. So what we also did, we tested knowledge about plants. So we wanted to know, how do students categorize plants as living organisms? And we asked them some characteristics of life, or the characteristics of life. How do they apply to bacteria, plants, animals, and mushrooms? And what we found were that the animals are really a quite homogeneous group. So animals are more or less seen as the living organism group, let's say. Whereas bacteria, plants, and fungi are not correlated within the group, but there are some characteristics of life that connect those groups, but you won't be able to separate the fungi or plants or bacteria as single groups of organisms as it is possible for animals. What we see is that maybe for example, being able to grow is a characteristic of life. Students closely connect to plants and fungi, and a bit also to bacteria. So those three groups are rather connected by things they have in common, but they won't be able to be separated from each other like the animals are. What we also tested were the attitudes. So we wanted to know whether people want more or less plants in their environment, or whether plants play a role in festivities in the family. And we also tested interest in plants, and we tested nature connectedness. What we found were that our tool was able to separate our three groups, the urban middle school students, the nature park students, and the experts. Also for the attitudes. And what we also see is that the knowledge and the attitudes, they follow our hypothesis that the urban middle school students should be also at the lowest part of the scale, and the experts always should be the highest group. The same is true for interest, and same is true for nature connectedness. In the second part of the presentation, I will tell you something about what we did about mental models of plants. So where we wanted to know what do people think of when they are talking or when they're thinking of plants. A mental model is an internal representation people use to understand their environment. They are quite persistent across ages and cultures. Cultures can also be dynamic and change with time. Are also important for us because they influence the attention people give to an object, and influence also the reasoning of a person, which is also important for us to understand how people reason their attitudes towards plants. They also depend on meaningful and memorable previous experiences. Was there relevant information accompanying an object, in our case plants? Was there emotional arousal, like empathy maybe? And what we know about mental models of plants is that students associate them primarily with flowers. Plant drawings become more detailed when people get older. From 5 to 6 years, children start to add blossoms, fruits, leaves to their drawings. And we know that better understanding of plant structures is also correlated with a better recollection of plant names. And maybe it was described that the mental models are quite stable after the age of 8. So we wanted to find out which types of plant students to draw in various age groups, which features do they include. And since most of the studies were done with students under 12 years, we wanted to know what are the differences to older age groups, and are there some maybe educational or developmental influences on their mental models. And so what we did, we analyzed their drawings, and they had the task to draw the first thing that comes to your mind for the terms plant, tree, flower, and grass. So we got 4 drawings from each of the participants. So we had 648 drawings from students between 6 and 18 years in grades 1 to 12 in 3 different schools in 2 Austrian counties. And we did a qualitative analysis on how they depicted the plants, and we had a quantitative analysis of how often did they depict certain features, and relying on the literature, we had some frequency values where we had some categories where we added them. And what we can say is that what's already was found in the literature, 75% draw a flower. If we say half of the diagram are flowers and a quarter is a potted plant, which is also often a flower, and 20% draw a tree, and the rest draws something different. If we ask them to draw a tree, most of them draw a deciduous tree, some of them a Christmas tree or coniferous trees. For flowers, most of them draw something daisy-like, some asteraceae-like flowers, some tulips, some roses, and we have in our sample there were some snowdrops, Galanthus nivalis. And for grass, we just had the possibility to make a difference, whether is there only a shoot axis in the picture, or are there also some leaves or maybe roots. And when we look at the features for the trees in different age groups, we can see that the depiction of fruit decreases with age, while some details in the bark increase, and also the roots increase in the drawings. And for the trees, we can also see that in the higher age groups, they draw more features, so they have more detailed drawings than in the lower age groups, which is not the same for flowers. What we can see is that older children tend to depict also leaf veins, and also stamina, whereas here in the lower age group, it's closely connected in this sample with drawing this snowdrop type of flowers. And we did not find any significant differences in the number of features over all of the age groups. So what we see is that the mental models of plants are rather stable regarding the number of features, but they diversify with age. Some features disappear in higher age groups. Some features appear in higher age groups. So the mental models evolve with maybe educational exposure. But what we can see is that refining the mental models is possible also in higher age groups. So they are not unchangeable after the age of 8 or something. And what we think is that it is important to make these mental models explicit to the students themselves. So what are the conclusions of our researchers, some of the conclusions? We think plants are not completely overlooked, as we could see in our hidden object picture and also in our free lists, also from the eye tracking. Plants can be brought to our attention by specific tasks, by priming quite easily. Plants are used to identify habitats and frameworks in a way, as we saw in our lists, that students in a first step very often use tree or forest or meadow or field as elements of ecosystems to describe how the landscape is structured. So they don't overlook the plants, but they don't see them on an individual level, but rather on an element of the ecosystem. And we think that the awareness is not so much about seeing different groups of organisms in a different way, even if maybe animals are the organism group most of the people or most of the students think of when they think about some living organisms. But the important issue for me was to see that the difference between the experts and our students is how they perceive or how they process the weight of the natural world in comparison to the inanimate world, to the anthropogenic objects, to the houses and so on. Zoocentrism is certainly an educational or societal issue, but it's not something hardwired in our brain we can't change. And also important for us as researchers is we think the construct and the tool are valid and reliable, and we can now go on using them for exploring plant awareness in different contexts. From this point also resulted a group of colleagues. We are now trying to conceptualize what we would like to call biodiversity awareness, so that we don't focus only on plants, but rather on all of the organisms and also on different aspects of biodiversity, since we think what is important in the perception is rather the difference between how people perceive natural objects or living organisms and inanimate anthropogenic objects. For education, what could be interesting for us? what we see is teaching students species identification is not enough, because we see they all knew the dandelion, but nobody remembered it and nobody wrote it in their lists. So what we think is that we have to give our students the possibility to build a relationship to plants, and to give plants a meaningful role in their life. That we can use the mental models as clues for educational interventions. Let's say if students draw blossoms without stamina, we can connect it to pollination maybe, and talk with them how they think pollination works without stamina. We can connect the role of flowers and fruit and plant growth. We can connect the drawings of missing or depicted roots and leaf veins and the role of plants play in evapotranspiration. And from this point of view, we are back where we started, at those botany issues, central knowledge about plants, because we then need plant anatomy and morphology. We also need knowledge about photosynthesis, plants produces in ecosystems, reproduction, flower ecology. Flower ecology leads to food production. Evapotranspiration leads to global warming, and also maybe to the biodiversity crisis, or plants as fundament of all ecosystems. And so I think what we learned from our research is that plants are not completely lost for us, and there are many ways to make them relevant for our students. And there is nothing like inherited or innate blindness we can't work against, and we should maybe not always think of working against something our students bring with us, but rather working with their experiences, rather working with build on their relationships they maybe have to plants, and use all of these basis for our teaching about plants. So there was also a publication which is called "Botany is not boring, but maybe school biology is, or school botany is," or "Plants are not boring, but maybe school botany is." And I think that's an important idea we should take with us for working with our students for the future, based on what we've found out about plants and plant awareness. Okay, so thank you again for listening to me, and I am happy that so many people found the time to join the meeting. So if there are questions from your side, I am happy to try to answer them.
Thank you, Peter, for a very inspiring talk and such exciting studies you've made. I have a question in the chat here. Please write your questions in the chat if you'd like to. Here we have a question. Does your research include more than awareness, also the connectedness and the feeling of value to nature? Can something be said about the relation between awareness to the actual care for nature?
What in our studies that we also assess the nature connectedness, and we also see that there is a correlation, but the correlation is on a medium level. So it's not that strong that one would think, maybe, because I think that being nature connected, or feeling himself nature connected or connected to nature, is something that could also be rather in a kind of a spiritual sense, and is not necessarily related to the natural world as from a biological point of view. So I think that people can also feel connected to nature and still just see nature kind of as a kind of a scenery for their activities they do in nature, maybe. So we did not explore at the moment willingness to protect nature in relation to plant awareness, but it will certainly be one of the next steps that we plan to do as soon as the tool is published, which should be during the next month. Then we will start the next steps in where we want to try to understand how plant awareness is related to other constructs like maybe nature connectedness or willingness to protect.
Thank you. I have one question is, what do you think is needed to bring plants more into the picture and try and curb this zoocentrism that you talked about?
I think that maybe some like those projects where you are working, that the Saarwilder project that gives students the possibility to get in personal relation to plants. But the thing is that should only be the first step. So we can also, of course, let people or let students grow a seed and explore how the plant develops, and then we have to take the next step and help them to transfer their maybe positive attitudes or their positive experiences with the plants they know also to other organisms, so that they don't get stuck in I'm caring now about my pot plant and I like my pot plant, but helping them to transfer these maybe entrance into the plant world to also plants in the environment.
Mm, thank you. I think that's all the questions we have right now, Peter. Let me just have a check that I haven't missed anybody. The So thank you so much, Peter, for that really inspiring talk. And thank you all too for participating. Next week, Professor Anton Stahl Olafsson and postdoc Oriel Garcia Antunes from the University of Copenhagen will hold a talk about just about nature connectedness, so which we are very much looking forward to, and we hope you will join us. If you would like to attend this webinar, please register again via the website. All webinars are recorded and will be available on the Interreg webpage later. And after this whole webinar series, you will receive an email with a questionnaire on reflections and learning. And we'd really appreciate if you could fill this in.